Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, we thank you for watching us. Well, will Pennsylvania matter in presidential primaries? But first, let's take a look at the economy, both in Pennsylvania and in the nation, following these words.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back. Well, joining me, as often is the case, is David Taylor. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association and an expert on the state of the economy, many aspects, particularly manufacturing. David, before we talk specifically about manufacturing, what is the overall state of the economy?
Well, I mean, we're continuing to limp along, I would say. Things are trending very slightly positive. I mean, inflation is lessening. Unemployment remains low. Of course, that really masks the more important number, which is the workforce participation rate, which also continues to be very low.
Which is a serious problem, because you can't, and I say this repeatedly, you go into an urban, even a suburban area, and there are shops and stores, help wanted, help wanted, help wanted, everywhere.
Right.
And that continues to be the case?
Yes, sir. And it winds up being a real break on economic growth, almost like a cap on growth, because if an employer can't hire enough folks to do the work that needs done, then obviously they can't expand operations. They're just trying to stay afloat at current levels of production. Yeah,
that's a great point. And how about in Pennsylvania? The same here?
Yeah, I mean, mostly the same. I mean, with manufacturing, the Institute for Supply Management's manufacturing index for the nation contracted for the 10th consecutive month in August, which is the most recent month for stats. In Pennsylvania, manufacturing employment is remaining steady, between 560 and 570,000 employees, seasonally adjusted. But again, manufacturers are continuing to experience softened demand and difficulties hiring, and problems with inflation increasing the cost of inputs.
Which are the largest manufacturing areas in our state?
Well, of the manufacturing subsectors, industrial chemicals and industrial metals are leading products, along with pharmaceuticals and some other durables I can't think of right now.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, when we talked about the industrial era, it was coal, iron, steel.
Yes.
And of course now, natural gas.
Yes.
Up in the Northeast, but particularly out in the southwestern part of our state, where it's a big part of the economy, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And again, that remains the most promising opportunity for expanding industrial activity in Pennsylvania, having access to that fundamental input, whether we're using the natural gas or the natural gas byproducts for fuel or as manufacturing inputs. But Terry, I mean, at this moment in time, the U.S. really needs to commit to reindustrialization. We have seen much of our manufacturing capacity stripped away over the last quarter century, ever since we gave China most favored nation trading status, and that this has badly damaged our defense industrial base. And now we run the risk of being militarily engaged on 3 fronts: in Ukraine, and resupplying Israel, and defending Taiwan.
Right.
And so there's a great strain on manufacture of armaments, which reflects an overall lack of capacity in manufacturing.
Yeah, there was a period of time when the economies of the old industrial areas went into decline, picked up more by diversified manufacturing, I'll say. And it looks like natural gas, particularly out in the Southwest, has really helped improve the economy out there. But there's still parts of our state that are virtually devoid of manufacturing.
Well, again, there's a great promise of resurrecting our brownfields. There are a lot of our communities that are aching from where their factories used to be. And with the abundant, available, affordable energy from natural gas, the inputs from the natural gas byproducts, we should be deploying all of that to help move the price point and to capture the reinvestment that should come if we mobilize that resource. But to do that, you've got to build out energy infrastructure, and we've got to stabilize our environment for for taxes and regulation and all those things, so that investors know what they're getting into. That if there's uncertainty, they're not going to come.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about tax legislation and other areas of the economy with our guest, David Taylor.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
All right, let's talk a little bit about taxes, something we all pay in one way or another. David, let's talk about tax legislation in the House, and then I want to expand it a bit.
Yes, of course. Well, the State House of Representatives passed a tax package. It was a party line vote, 102 Democrats to 101 Republicans. And Terry, it concerns me very much that what happened in the House was that members were presented with a 260-page amendment with 15 minutes to review prior to a vote. This is no way to legislate, and that this was done in the evening, past the hour when the House was no longer supposed to be in session, and it really takes us back to the bad days of 2005 and the midnight pay grab. And
I was going to say that's not an uncommon practice in the Pennsylvania legislature.
Well, it was common practice days gone by,
right.
But in the wake of the massive loss of incumbents who were either voted out or retired ahead of getting voted out, that the House changed its rules so that this sort of thing wasn't supposed to happen. And again, the legislation that was put forward, it had no fiscal note, so that members couldn't look at it and say, well, here's how much this will cost. This is the impact on taxpayers and on the economy if we do this. And so, and again, days gone by, this was done by both parties. So I mean, this is not a partisan issue. This is a Pennsylvania issue about how we're going to have deliberative, representative self-government. It is, we've seen a lot of this in Washington, where members get ambushed with, a giant bill that there's no chance to read or understand before being forced to take a vote. This is not good practice. This is bad for the Commonwealth, and this is regrettable. And more than that, we should all say this is not acceptable. This is not any way to do business. And it's also a bad bill beyond that. And
there's nothing to do with the specifics of it. It just has to do with a bad legislative practice.
Well, that's my first point. But going beyond that, yes, this is a bad bill, because at the same time that it does include some things that would help Pennsylvania's business tax competitiveness, like uncapping the carry forward of net operating losses, of accelerating the phase down of Pennsylvania's much too high corporate net income tax rate. But it also includes a poison pill, which is mandatory unitary combined reporting, which is an attempt. Let me explain. So it would give the Pennsylvania Department of Revenue the power to export Pennsylvania business tax liability onto businesses' operations in other states and other countries. So again, this is in pursuit of a mythical pot of leprechaun gold, but to force businesses to undergo the complexity of trying to comply with all this, with the lawyers that you have to hire and the CPAs that you have to pay, when in fact there's going to be no windfall for the Commonwealth, and that you're going to basically give businesses a reason to not come to Pennsylvania, or for those businesses that are here to stop doing business.
Well, where does this all go ultimately? I mean, in the legislature.
It goes to the state Senate. And that the Senate is, looking on this kind of bemusedly, like, who would govern this way? What's this, what's this mismatch that they've just sent to us? And so, again, if there's going to be consideration of this in the Senate, which I don't think there's going to be, this deserves hearings, legislative hearings, which were not held in the House. These are complex ideas that have far-reaching consequences, and that
seems unusual, not given the significance of that subject, not to have hearings.
Correct. And so again, this is the slapdash kind of practice that we have seen out of the new majority in the House. And again, every time you fail to uphold a standard, you get a new standard, a lower standard, and we can't let that stand.
Thanks for coming in, and we'll expect you to come in the future and keep us up to date on the status of the economy. All right, how about this one? Will your vote matter when it comes to the nomination of the candidates for the party candidates for the presidency of the United States? We'll take up the primary date and more with two Capitol Hill reporters coming up.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, imagine this. Pennsylvania is one of the critical battleground states in the presidential election. But when it comes to nominating the party candidates, we're irrelevant. And I'll say that word again, irrelevant. Joining me to talk about that and more is Marc Levy. He's a Capitol reporter with the Associated Press. Actually, he covers more than just the Capitol. And Angela Couloumbis, she's with Spotlight PA. All right, Angela, I'm going to start with you. To say that we don't matter when it comes to the nomination of the party candidates is an understatement, given the significance of our state in the general election.
That's right. So there have been discussions for years now, going back to when I started in the Capitol back in 2005, about moving the primary up so that Pennsylvania, which is so critical, as you said, in the general election, has more of a say in picking the party candidate. This year, there was significant movement on that front, unlike in years past. And the legislature has seriously taken up the issue, even as counties have said, okay, if you want to do this, please do it quickly, because we have to make plans for next year. A lot of these counties reserve polling places a year in advance, and it's very difficult for them to make changes at the last minute. Fast forward to where we are today, it seems like the effort is collapsing, primarily because there's been disagreements over what specific date to move it to. The House and the Senate have also clashed on that front. It's not just a Republican-Democrat thing, it's between the two chambers. And as it stands right now, it is in late April. It falls on Passover.
It's April 23rd, right?
That's correct. It's April 23rd.
Which is a Jewish holiday.
That's right. And the Senate wanted to move it to March 19th. The House balked at that date. passed a bill eventually that would move it to April 2nd. That too has some pushback. And now counties, it's been reported that counties are asking the state legislature to stop any more discussion on this and just leave it as is.
Mark, the problem, the county officials are saying if you move it back, that puts us into the holiday season, Christmas and New Year's, to get organized to actually conduct these primary elections.
Right. So there's a 13-week primary season. The first day you can start circulating the paperwork. If you want to be a candidate, you got to get signatures. You have 3 weeks to do that. If you move up the primary, you're pushing that period into the winter holidays, Hanukkah, Christmas, New Year's, and lawmakers don't want to do that. There was talk about compressing the primary season down to 11 weeks, so that would start after the holidays conclude, and you can also move up the primary date to be much earlier in the cycle, so that Pennsylvania may still be there voting when there's a contested primary. But one of the things that people have said is that if you compress the primary season, you're making it more difficult for challengers who they have to go out and get signatures. They're less known to voters, and you're making it easier for incumbents to win their primaries.
Right. All right, let's turn to another subject. There's a couple things else I want to talk about. Let's talk about the budget stalemate. The legislature passed the budget, but there's problems. What's the problem?
So there's a bunch of bills that have to go along with the budget, right? And there was a disagreement over how the budget was passed. Maybe 90% of the money in this $45 billion budget can go out and can be spent. But there's all sorts of glitches because legislation that's supposed to go with it hasn't gone with it. There's a partisan dispute between Republicans and Democrats in the House. And one of the highest profile fallout that we're seeing from it is that hundreds of millions of dollars that normally goes to 4 state-related universities, Penn State, Temple, Pitt, and Lincoln, has not been approved. It takes 2/3 majorities in each chamber to get this money out. And this money is specifically for these schools to keep down the tuition of in-state students. So for now, the schools say, look, we're plugging the gap with money that we're scraping together from other sources. But Pennsylvania is already bottom of the barrel when it comes to funding higher education among states. It has an abysmal record.
We're going to run to a break. When we get back, I want to continue with this subject a bit and then turn to this automatic voter registration. It's very important, and it's become controversial.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, Angela, the budget, add to it.
Yeah, as Mark was saying, I mean, the high-profile issue right now is funding for the state-relateds, and it has spotlighted yet again the problem that Mark highlighted as well, which is that Pennsylvania is at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to things like assistance to higher ed institutions. Students graduating with debt, and also, assistance for tuition for them so that they can then go on and be productive in the workplace.
All right, I want to talk about something referred to as automatic voter registration. I'll stay with you on this. When it didn't seem controversial to me, but it certainly has become controversial. First of all, what is automatic voter registration, and how does it differ from the registration that existed before?
Right. I don't quite understand the pushback on this either. To me, the change seems very small, but generally speaking, you used to go to the DMV and then they would ask you...
You're getting a license or an ID.
That's right. And they would ask you, do you want to register to vote? And you would have to say yes or no. Right. Through an executive change, Governor Shapiro made it so that now when you go for your license or some other thing to the DMV, they will ask you, well, they will tell you, you are being registered to vote as part of this process unless you say no.
So what I don't understand is what's controversial about that? If you don't want to be registered, you think putting pressure on the people to say no?
I don't quite understand the pushback. I think there are some people, particularly on the Republican side, who feel that it could lead to minors being improperly registered, and when they go for their license and they're not voting age yet, potentially people who are undocumented or such who will go in and possibly get the right to vote.
Yeah, well, Mark, look, when you go to register or when you go to take out a driver's license, don't the folks in the motor vehicle, don't they have your age?
So, yes, they do. They also flag your immigration status. Now, Pennsylvania learned the hard way a few years ago when people who are in the country illegally but were not citizens were getting driver's license, and they were also being registered to vote inadvertently. It was a 2-decade-old glitch that Pennsylvania says it fixed in 2017. So everyone's immigration status is flagged, their age is flagged, and the system is supposed to prevent them from becoming registered to vote. Now, President Trump went on his Truth Social platform and said that here's another example of Democrats trying to steal the election. This is another one of his baseless lies about the election being stolen. The research that's been done on automatic voter registration, it exists in 23 other states.
23, yeah.
Is that it tends to have a slight bump in registration, and it's generally nonpartisan, but if anything, it might help register whiter, more rural voters who tend to be Republican. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it does come as a big surprise to me when there was some controversy about it. I just didn't see the elements of the controversy.
Well, I think you have to look at it through the prism of the larger mistrust that has been put into our election system. Like Mark said, a lot of it fueled baselessly by former President Trump. So I think within that context, it's more easily digestible to understand why there is pushback to this.
Yeah, but it looks like it might help the pro-Trump voters, as you point out, the rural voters, Republican voters in the state.
Right, and the track record so far in Pennsylvania is too short to be able to do any kind of analysis or research on what it's doing so far. People are being registered that way. When you go to update your license, you'll be asked if you want to update your information in your voter file, so you can change your party, you can change your address. It's
well, you could do it also by going into the various voter places in your county.
Right. Right, but this system, because it reaches so many more people, is said by election officials to be a very efficient way and inexpensive way of maintaining voter rolls.
Less than a minute to go, but it's also been argued that Shapiro didn't have the authority to do this. It should be done by the legislature.
Right. So that is and has been a constant over the years. Who has the authority to make decisions on elections? State law says the legislature does have broad authority over the time and the place of elections, and as a result, there is, again, clashes on this.
That's an important update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, you stay well.